The first detection came at 3:47 UTC, when the array at the Atacama Large Millimeter Telescope in Chile registered an anomaly that shouldn't exist. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was not supposed to be at the facility. Her grant had been cut months ago, her xenoanthropological research deemed too speculative by the Academic Review Board. Yet here she was, surrounded by outdated monitoring equipment, nursing her third cup of coffee and reviewing data from her own privately funded research. The anomaly was subtle, a quantum fluctuation in the fabric of local spacetime that most systems would have dismissed as background noise. But Elena's custom-built algorithms, developed from years of studying theoretical interstellar communication patterns, flagged it immediately. Her fingers, calloused from years of typing and marked with a small burn scar from a lab accident years ago, flew across the keyboard. "No, no, no," she muttered, her Chilean accent thickening with excitement and growing tension. The data didn't make sense, unless it made perfect sense. 53 kilometers away, in a converted Cold War-era bunker beneath the Andes Mountains, Marcus Chen received her encrypted message. He was not a scientist, not anymore. Once a cutting-edge cybersecurity expert for the United Nations, he had spent the last decade building something that most of humanity would consider impossible, a global resistance network prepared for an event that seemed like pure paranoia. The message was simple: magnitude 12 quantum variance, non-terrestrial origin, confirmation protocol Omega-9. Marcus's eyes, hardened by years of preparation, scanned the message. His team, a collection of brilliant misfits from every continent, had been waiting for this moment, waiting and preparing. Activate Shadow Protocol. He spoke softly into a communication device that looked like nothing more than an ordinary smartwatch. Around the world, dormant systems began to wake up. In a small apartment in Tokyo, Sarah Liu, brilliant quantum computing engineer and the youngest person ever to be simultaneously blacklisted by 3 major tech corporations, received her activation signal. Her apartment was less a living space and more a cathedral of technological innovation. Holographic displays flickered to life. Quantum processors hummed with anticipation. Back at the Atacama Telescope, Elena's discovery was about to become much more than an academic curiosity. The first Zornak scout ships entered the solar system with a clinical precision that bordered on arrogance. Their technology was so advanced it appeared almost magical. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could transmit information across light years in moments, adaptive camouflage that could render massive starships invisible to conventional detection systems. They did not come in peace. They did not come with war. They came with something far more terrifying: administrative procedure. The transmission that followed was a masterpiece of bureaucratic horror. In perfectly translated languages, every major human tongue simultaneously, the Zornak announced their classification of Earth. Not as a potential partner, not as a civilization to be contacted, but as an asset to be integrated. Planetary classification. Emerging species designation E372, the transmission declared. Preliminary integration protocols to commence immediately. Resistance is statistically improbable. Compliance is mandatory. Elena's hand trembled, but not from fear. From a growing, burning rage. Marcus's underground network, which had seemed like a paranoid fantasy to most, now represented humanity's most sophisticated defense mechanism. Quantum encrypted communication networks, adaptive AI defense systems, technological countermeasures developed through decades of speculation and preparation. Sarah Liu began running her first set of quantum computational models. The Zornak thought they were bringing an administrative procedure to a primitive planet. They were about to discover they were walking into a technological hornet's nest. In that moment, 3 people, scattered across the planet, understood something the alien concordance did not. Humanity was not going to be anyone's administrative footnote. The resistance had been waiting. And now, it would begin. The Zornak invasion fleet arrived with calculated precision. 17 massive vessels, each the size of a small city, positioned strategically around Earth's major population centers. Their energy signatures suggested technology beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Weapon systems that could vaporize entire metropolitan areas in milliseconds. Quantum communication networks that made human encryption look like children's playground codes. In Tokyo, Sarah Liu's fingers blazed across holographic interfaces, her custom-built quantum computing array consuming unprecedented amounts of power. The devices around her apartment hummed with an intensity that caused nearby electrical systems to flicker. Most of her equipment was technically illegal, salvaged from black market research facilities, modified beyond recognition, running algorithms that would make most scientific review boards apoplectic. Come on, she muttered, her eyes reflecting lines of incomprehensible code. The Zornak's initial communication burst contained massive amounts of data, not just a transmission, but a complete administrative protocol for human integration. Most would see an insurmountable technological barrier. Sarah saw a puzzle waiting to be dismantled. Beneath the ends, Marcus Chen watched multiple holographic displays, each showing different global communication networks. His team, a collection of former military strategists, rogue programmers, and brilliant outcasts, had spent a decade preparing for this moment. They weren't just a resistance group. They were a comprehensive human survival protocol. Adaptive Response System Online. Marcus spoke into his communication device. Around the world, dormant networks activated. Not military installations, not traditional defense systems, something far more insidious and innovative. The first Zornak landing craft descended on Beijing, their energy signatures announcing technological superiority. Massive gravitational displacement generators created a perfect landing zone, suppressing local communications, neutralizing electronic systems. It was a textbook invasion procedure, one that had subjugated countless civilizations across the galaxy. They didn't expect Sarah Liu. Her quantum algorithm, dubbed the Adaptive Resonance Protocol, didn't just intercept the Zornak's communication systems. It began to understand them, to mirror them, to subvert them. The first landing craft's navigation systems suddenly erupted in cascading error messages. Quantum encryption keys that should have been impenetrable began to unravel. The craft's sophisticated AI began receiving conflicting instructions, its own communication networks turning against it. Target acquisition compromised. The Zornak craft's primary system announced in its native language. Quantum resonance anomaly detected. Sarah smiled. This was only the beginning. In the Atacama Desert, Alina Rodriguez watched the unfolding scenario with a xenoanthropologist's clinical detachment and a growing sense of vindication. Her decades of research, repeatedly dismissed by academic institutions, were being proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. The Zornak weren't just technologically advanced. They were culturally rigid. Their entire administrative and military structure relied on predictability, on systems that had worked for millennia. Humanity represented something they couldn't comprehend. A species of technological wildcard, capable of adapting faster than any predictive model could calculate. Marcus's global network began its true work. It wasn't about direct military confrontation. It was about information warfare, about turning the Zornak's own systems against them. Quantum encrypted communication nodes, hidden in everything from cellular networks to satellite arrays, began transmitting carefully constructed mimetic payloads. Not just data, but carefully designed informational structures that would exploit the Zornak's rigid communication protocols. In London, a team of linguists and computer scientists worked alongside Marcus, decrypting fragments of Zornak communication. They weren't just translating. They were understanding the fundamental communication architecture of an alien civilization. The Beijing landing site became chaos. The Zornak craft's own systems began broadcasting conflicting coordinates, its weapon systems pointing in random directions. What should have been a precise military insertion turned into a technological nightmare. Adaptive response successful, Sarah whispered, her fingers never leaving the holographic interface. The Zornak had arrived expecting to find a primitive species ready for integration. Instead, they discovered a technological ecosystem that defied every predictive model in their vast galactic database. Humanity's resistance had begun, and it was nothing like anyone, human or alien, had ever anticipated. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that most governments would have killed to possess. Not a military asset, but something far more dangerous, a comprehensive linguistic and psychological analysis of the Zornak communication networks. Her team was unlike any research group in human history. Linguists who spoke languages that had been dead for centuries. Psychologists specialized in cross-cultural communication. Anthropologists who had studied the most isolated societies on Earth. And now, they were turning their expertise toward the most complex subject imaginable, an alien civilization's psychological infrastructure. It's not just a language, Elena explained to Marcus Chen, who watched the holographic displays with the intensity of a military strategist. It's a complete cognitive framework. The Zornak don't just communicate. They conceptualize reality through a hierarchical linguistic structure that's more rigid than any human bureaucracy. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Aisha Okeke, a Nigerian linguist who had spent her career studying communication patterns in extreme social structures, noticed something profound. The Zornak's language contained built-in hierarchical constraints that made lateral thinking fundamentally impossible within their communication system. They can't truly improvise, Aisha explained, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that displayed complex linguistic mappings. Their entire communication protocol is a self-reinforcing system of status and compliance. Each communication act simultaneously confirms and constrains their social hierarchy. In Tokyo, Sarah Liu was turning this linguistic insight into a weapon. Her quantum computing array began generating what she called linguistic viruses, communication packets designed to exploit the precise vulnerabilities in the Zornak's communication infrastructure. These weren't simple hacks or traditional cyber attacks. They were carefully constructed mimetic payloads that would propagate through the alien communication networks like a philosophical plague. The first wave of these linguistic viruses targeted the Zornak's administrative communication channels. They didn't just disrupt communication. They introduced subtle logical contradictions that would ripple through their entire bureaucratic structure. On their massive command ships, Zornak administrators began receiving communication packets that seemed to comply with all their protocols, while simultaneously undermining their fundamental operational assumptions. It was information warfare at a level of complexity that defied traditional military doctrine. Marcus's global resistance network went into overdrive. They weren't just defending. They were actively dismantling the Zornak's psychological infrastructure. In underground facilities across the globe, teams worked on what they called cognitive subversion protocols. These weren't military strategies in any traditional sense. They were intricate psychological operations designed to introduce doubt, to create fractures in the alien civilization's understanding of reality. A team of philosophers worked alongside computer scientists, creating communication structures that would challenge the Zornak's most fundamental cognitive assumptions. Another group, composed of artists and communication theorists, developed visual and linguistic patterns that would trigger cognitive dissonance in the alien communication networks. The Zornak began to experience something unprecedented in their millennia-long history of galactic administration: uncertainty. Their quantum communication networks, which had always been models of perfect efficiency, began to show inexplicable anomalies. Communication pathways that had been stable for centuries suddenly developed unexpected cognitive feedback loops. Status reports contained subtle contradictions that their AI systems couldn't immediately resolve. What made it truly terrifying was how subtle the attack was. This wasn't a military invasion. This was a fundamental challenge to their entire way of understanding reality. Elena watched the holographic displays, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "We're not just resisting," she told Marcus. "We're teaching them an entirely new way of thinking about communication, about hierarchy, about possibility. The Zornak had arrived expecting to find a primitive species ready for integration. Instead, they discovered a civilization that could weaponize communication itself. Humanity's resistance had moved beyond technology. It had become a war of consciousness, of fundamental ways of perceiving and understanding reality. And they were just getting started. The Concordance Disruptor was born in chaos. Deep beneath the Andes Mountains, in a research facility that officially did not exist, Sarah Liu worked with a team of scientists who had been deemed too dangerous, too radical, or too brilliant for traditional research institutions. They were humanity's last, best hope, and they knew it. The facility looked like a nightmare of technological complexity. Quantum computing arrays that consumed more power than entire cities. Holographic interfaces that shifted and changed with each breath. Cooling systems that used experimental cryogenic technologies developed in black-budget research programs. Sarah's hands moved with a surgeon's precision, manipulating quantum entanglement matrices that would have been considered impossible just months ago. The team around her represented the most diverse collection of scientific minds ever assembled. Exiled MIT professors worked alongside self-taught programmers from Brazilian favelas. Quantum physicists from Chinese research institutes collaborated with rogue engineers who had been blacklisted from every major tech corporation. "We're not just building a weapon," Sarah announced to the team. "We're creating a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction." The Concordance Disruptor was unlike anything in human or alien technological history. It wasn't a traditional weapon. It was a quantum communication system that could simultaneously decrypt, manipulate, and neutralize the most advanced technological infrastructure in the known galaxy. Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, Alina's brother and a brilliant quantum physicist, explained the core concept to Marcus Chen during a secure communication burst. Imagine if you could not just intercept a communication, but fundamentally alter the underlying communication protocol at a quantum level. We're talking about changing the fundamental rules of technological interaction. The breakthrough came from an unexpected convergence of technologies, a breakthrough in quantum computing. Advanced neural network algorithms developed by an AI research team in Nairobi, experimental quantum entanglement technologies that had been dismissed as theoretical, and a deep understanding of the Zornak's communication infrastructure, courtesy of Elena's linguistic research. Each component was remarkable. Together, they were revolutionary. The first full test came unexpectedly. The Zornak scout ship entered the solar system, its quantum communication networks blazing with what they believed was an unbreakable encryption protocol. Sarah's team saw it as an opportunity. "Activate primary quantum resonance," she commanded. The Concordance Disruptor didn't just intercept the alien communication. It began to understand it, to mirror it, and then to manipulate it. The Zornak ship's communication networks began to experience something unprecedented. Their quantum encryption began to unravel from the inside. Communication pathways that had been stable for centuries suddenly developed unexpected feedback loops. Status reports contained contradictions that their AI systems couldn't resolve. Target acquisition compromised. The ship's primary system announced in its native language. Quantum resonance anomaly detected. But it was far more than an anomaly. It was a complete reimagining of technological interaction. Marcus watched the holographic displays, understanding the broader strategic implications. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental challenge to the Zornak's understanding of technological superiority. "We're not just defending," he told his team. "We're rewriting the rules of technological engagement." The Concordance Disruptor represented something more than a weapon. It was a philosophical statement about technological interaction, a declaration that humanity's strength wasn't in raw technological power, but in adaptability, in the ability to fundamentally reimagine technological possibilities. In the research facility, Sarah Liu allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The Zornak had arrived expecting to find a primitive species ready for integration. Instead, they had discovered a civilization capable of transforming technology itself. The resistance had just been elevated to an entirely new level of technological warfare. And they were just getting started. The message spread through hidden quantum communication channels like a wildfire of hope. Kizara, a methane-breathing engineer from the Vorlex cluster, received the first encrypted transmission in a language that shouldn't exist. Her species had been a client race of the Zornak concordance for 17 generations, subjected to systematic technological suppression, their natural innovations constantly stripped and redistributed to maintain the Empire's technological monopoly. The transmission contained more than information. It contained a promise. In the research facility beneath the Andes, Alina Rodriguez studied the first wave of responses from subjugated civilizations. Each communication was a story of oppression, of potential brutally constrained by the Zornak's hierarchical system. Species that had been technological innovators, reduced to extraction colonies. Civilizations with remarkable adaptive capabilities, systematically prevented from developing their full potential. They're not just waiting for liberation, Elena explained to Marcus. They're waiting for a framework of possibility. The Global Human Resistance Network began its most complex operation yet. It wasn't about military conquest. It was about creating a new model of interstellar cooperation. Sarah Liu's quantum communication systems began distributing what the team called possibility protocols, encrypted data packages that contained more than technological information. They were complete infrastructural blueprints, communication system designs, adaptive technological frameworks that could be modified by each receiving civilization. Kizara's engineering team was the first to fully implement a possibility protocol. Their methane-based communication networks, which had been brutally restricted by Zornak control, suddenly expanded exponentially. Technologies that had been suppressed for generations began to flourish. The Zornak had always maintained control through a simple mechanism: technological segregation. Each species was allowed only the minimum technological capability required for their assigned role in the Concordance's vast administrative structure. Humanity shattered that model completely. The possibility protocols weren't just technological blueprints. They were a philosophical framework of technological and cultural exchange. Each protocol contained adaptive systems that could be modified, improved, reimagined by the receiving civilization. On a planet orbiting a dim red dwarf star, the Shireen, a crystalline species that communicated through complex light refraction patterns, began to rebuild communication networks that had been systematically dismantled for centuries. Their natural ability to process quantum information, which the Zornak had brutally suppressed, suddenly found a new expression. Marcus watched the developing situation with a strategic eye that went beyond traditional military thinking. "We're not just resisting," he told his team. "We're creating a new model of interstellar interaction." Elena's research revealed the deeper implications. The Zornak's galactic administration was built on a fundamental assumption of hierarchical control. Each species was assigned a specific role, with technological and communicative capabilities carefully restricted. Humanity's resistance was revealing something profound. Technological and cultural potential was not a limited resource to be controlled, but an exponential possibility waiting to be unleashed. The first truly collaborative communication networks began to emerge. The Vorlex engineers shared methane processing technologies. The Shireen contributed quantum communication insights. Human teams provided adaptive technological frameworks. It was something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly collaborative technological ecosystem. The Zornak monitoring systems began to detect something they had never encountered. Not a military uprising, not a traditional rebellion, but a complete reimagining of interstellar interaction. Civilizations that had been client races for generations began to develop technologies that defied the Concordance's predictive models. Communication networks that could not be easily monitored or controlled. Technological innovations that emerged from collaborative, non-hierarchical frameworks. "We're not just fighting," Elena whispered, watching the holographic displays that showed the emerging galactic network. "We're teaching an entirely new way of existing." The resistance had moved beyond a human conflict. It had become a galactic transformation. and they were just getting started. The Battle of Proxima Nexus was never going to be a traditional military engagement. Marcus Chen stood at the center of a command hub that defied every conventional understanding of military strategy. Around him, representatives from 12 different species worked in perfect synchronization, a living testament to the collaborative network humanity had been building. Kizara, the methane-breathing engineer from the Vorlex cluster, adjusted quantum entanglement communication arrays with a precision that would have been impossible mere months ago. Beside her, a Shireen crystalline tactician manipulated holographic displays using complex light refraction patterns that served as both communication and strategic analysis. Sarah Liu's concordance disruptor had evolved. What had begun as a theoretical quantum communication weapon was now a comprehensive strategic platform that could simultaneously analyze, predict, and manipulate complex interstellar communication networks. This isn't about destroying, Marcus explained to the assembled coalition. This is about fundamental system transformation. The Zornak had assembled what they believed was an unbeatable assault force: 17 primary command ships, 43 support vessels, a quantum communication network that had maintained galactic control for millennia. Their strategy was a masterpiece of hierarchical military doctrine, each ship, each unit operating with machine-like precision within a predetermined operational framework. They didn't understand that their strength was also their greatest weakness. Alina Rodriguez had spent months analyzing the Zornak's communication protocols. Her team had discovered something profound. The aliens' entire military and administrative structure was fundamentally unable to adapt to truly unexpected variables. The first phase of the attack wasn't an assault. It was a communication event. Sarah's quantum systems began broadcasting what looked like standard Zornak administrative communications, but each transmission contained subtle logical contradictions, quantum-encrypted packets designed to introduce cascading uncertainty into the aliens' communication networks. Zornak command ships began receiving conflicting operational orders. Quantum encryption keys that had been stable for centuries suddenly developed inexplicable instabilities. Their AI systems, designed for perfect hierarchical compliance, began to experience something unprecedented: doubt. Marcus watched the holographic displays with the calm of someone executing a carefully prepared plan. "Activate distributed resonance protocol," he commanded. Across the Proxima Nexus, a strategic intersection of multiple quantum communication pathways, something extraordinary happened. The coalition forces weren't traditional military units. They were adaptive communication nodes. Each ship, each platform became part of a living, breathing network that could instantaneously reconfigure itself. Where the Zornak saw rigid military formations, the coalition presented a fluid, constantly shifting strategic ecosystem. Kizara's methane processing technologies allowed for communication methods the Zornak couldn't even comprehend. The Shireen's quantum light-based communication systems created interference patterns that completely disrupted the aliens' targeting systems. And at the center of it all, humanity's technological and strategic innovations served as the connective tissue. The Zornak command ships began to experience total systemic failure. Their quantum communication networks, once the most advanced in the known galaxy, started to collapse from within. Each attempt to reassert control introduced more uncertainty, more complexity. "They can't process randomness," Alina observed, watching the holographic displays. "Their entire system is designed to eliminate variables. But we're introducing unlimited variables." It wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a comprehensive demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to conflict, to communication, to existence. The Zornak fleet didn't just lose. They experienced a complete systemic breakdown that challenged their most fundamental understanding of operational control. As the last command ship began to fragment, Marcus turned to the assembled coalition. "This isn't an ending," he said. "This is a beginning." The Battle of Proxima Nexus would be remembered not as a military victory, but as the moment when a new model of interstellar interaction was born. Humanity had done more than resist. They had transformed the very concept of galactic conflict, and they were just getting started. The collapse began not with a bang, but with a whisper of uncertainty. Deep within the Zornak Central Administrative Nexus, a massive space station that had served as the administrative heart of their galactic empire for millennia, a mid-level bureaucrat named Vexnar experienced something unprecedented. A communication packet arrived that simultaneously confirmed and contradicted every established protocol. It was a moment of profound existential crisis. The Zornak administrative system had been built on absolute certainty. Hierarchical communication structures that left no room for interpretation. Operational protocols that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. Every communication act was a perfect confirmation of the existing social and political order. Until now, Elena Rodriguez watched the unfolding scenario through a complex network of quantum-encrypted observation systems. "It's not about destroying their system," she explained to Marcus. "It's about introducing fundamental uncertainty into their most basic communication infrastructure." The possibility protocols, those adaptive communication frameworks developed by the human resistance and their alien allies, began to propagate through the Zornak's communication networks like a philosophical virus. Each transmission carried more than information. It carried the potential for radical reimagination. On hundreds of client worlds, species that had been subjugated for generations began to activate long-suppressed technologies. The Vorlex engineers, led by Kizara, started rebuilding communication networks that had been brutally dismantled. The Shireen crystalline civilizations began to reclaim quantum communication technologies that had been stolen generations ago. Marcus tracked the systemic breakdown with a combination of strategic analysis and something closer to scientific curiosity. "We're not just defeating an empire," he told Sarah Liu. "We're demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to collective organization." The Zornak leadership discovered something terrifying. Their entire administrative structure was built on a fundamental assumption of absolute control that could not withstand true complexity. Rebellion erupted across multiple star systems, but these weren't traditional military uprisings. They were comprehensive social transformations. Communication networks that had been strictly controlled began to develop unprecedented levels of adaptive complexity. Technologies that had been suppressed for generations suddenly found expression. Vexnar, that mid-level bureaucrat, became an unexpected catalyst. The communication anomalies triggered a deep existential questioning that spread through the Zornak administrative class like a philosophical contagion. What did it mean when the fundamental communication protocols that had defined their entire civilization suddenly became unreliable? Sarah Liu's quantum communication systems continued to introduce carefully designed uncertainty packets. Each transmission was a precise instrument of systemic disruption. They didn't just break communication, they introduced the possibility of fundamentally different ways of existing. The Zornak Central Administrative Nexus began to experience total systemic failure. Communication networks that had been stable for millennia suddenly developed inexplicable feedback loops. Operational protocols began to contradict themselves. The perfect hierarchical structure that had maintained galactic control for generations began to fragment. "We're not destroying," Elena emphasized. "We're creating the possibility of transformation." On world after world, the client species of the Zornak Empire began to experience something unprecedented. Freedom was not just the absence of oppression. It was the active possibility of reimagination. The Concordance Disruptor, that revolutionary communication technology developed in the hidden research facilities beneath the Andes, proved to be more than a weapon. It was a comprehensive framework for systemic transformation. Marcus watched the holographic displays that tracked the systemic breakdown. What was happening wasn't a traditional revolution. It was a comprehensive reimagining of interstellar social organization. Vexnar, that mid-level Zornak bureaucrat, transmitted a communication that would be remembered as the beginning of the end. A message that simultaneously acknowledged and questioned the entire foundation of Zornak administrative control. The empire didn't collapse. It dissolved. transformed by the very communication systems that had once maintained its absolute control. Humanity had done more than defeat an empire. They had demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to collective existence. And they were just getting started. The Galactic Collaborative Network was not born in a moment of triumph, but in a process of continuous reimagination. 5 years after the collapse of the Zornak Concordance, Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Horizon Nexus, a massive space station that had become the symbolic heart of a fundamentally new approach to interstellar cooperation. Around her, representatives from 63 different species worked not as subordinates or conquerors, but as true collaborative partners. "We're not creating an empire," Elena explained to a group of young diplomats and scientists from across the galaxy. "We're creating a framework of possibility." The station itself was a testament to this new paradigm. Its infrastructure had been designed through a truly collaborative process. Method processing technologies from the Vorlex engineers integrated seamlessly with the quantum-like communication systems of the Shireen. Human adaptive technologies provided the connective tissue that allowed these radically different technological approaches to work together. Marcus Chen, now the primary strategic coordinator of the Galactic Collaborative Network, approached with Kazura, the methane-breathing engineer who had been one of the first to join humanity's resistance. Their very presence together was a statement about the new galactic order. The old model was about control, Marcus explained to the assembled representatives. Our model is about potential. Sarah Liu's technological innovations had become the foundation of a new approach to interstellar communication and development. The possibility protocols, those adaptive frameworks that had been crucial in dismantling the Zornak Empire, were now being used to help developing civilizations find their own path of technological and cultural growth. Each species was invited to contribute. Each civilization was seen as a unique source of potential, not a resource to be exploited. The most profound changes were happening on the smallest scales. On hundreds of worlds, species that had been brutally suppressed for generations were now developing technologies and cultural practices that had been unimaginable under Zornak control. A young Shireen researcher demonstrated a new quantum communication technique that combined light-based communication with adaptive neural networking. A Vorlex engineering team presented a breakthrough in sustainable energy generation that could transform entire planetary ecosystems. Human researchers worked alongside them, not as leaders, but as collaborative partners. Elena's research had revealed the profound psychological impact of this new approach. The systemic oppression of the Zornak hadn't just been about technological control. It had been about limiting the very concept of possibility. "We're not just sharing technology," she told the assembled representatives. "We're sharing the ability to imagine." The Concordance disruptor, that revolutionary communication technology, had evolved. No longer a weapon, it was now a comprehensive platform for collaborative innovation. Research centers across the galaxy used its adaptive communication frameworks to solve challenges that would have been unimaginable under the old system. Marcus watched the interactions with a sense of cautious hope. The Galactic Collaborative Network was not a perfect system. It was a continuous process of negotiation, of learning, of reimagination. Vexinar, the former Zornak bureaucrat, who had become a key advocate for systemic transformation, now served as a primary advisor, helping other hierarchical civilizations understand the potential of more adaptive governance models. The station's central forum became a living demonstration of the new approach. No single species dominated. No single technological or cultural approach was seen as superior. Instead, there was a constant process of collaborative problem-solving. "This is not an ending," Elena said, looking out at the vast starscape. "This is a continuous beginning." Sarah Liu unveiled the latest iteration of the Collaborative Network's core communication platform. It was more than a technological system. It was a philosophical framework that allowed for unprecedented levels of collective innovation. Kazura approached the podium, her method processing systems integrating seamlessly with the station's life support infrastructure. "We are not separate," she communicated through a translation system that captured not just words, but nuanced cultural context. We are a continuous process of becoming. The Galactic Collaborative Network represented something unprecedented. Not an empire, not a conquest, but a living, breathing ecosystem of collective potential. Humanity had done more than resist an oppressive system. They had demonstrated a fundamentally different way of existing. And they were still just beginning.